Everybody, just want to let you know Bulls is the #1 basketball team in the world. So we're going to start in Chapter 2, What is the Gospel, by Gilbert. Okay, let us begin. Chapter 2, God, the righteous Creator. Let me introduce you to God. Note the lowercase g. There's lowercase g written there, not God uppercase G. You might want to lower your voice a little before we go in. He might be sleeping now. He's old, and doesn't much understand or like his newfangled modern world. His golden days, the ones he talks about when you really get him going, were a long time ago, before most of us were even born. That was back when people cared what he thought about things and considered him pretty important to their lives. Of course, all that's changed now, though, and God, lowercase g, poor fellow, just never adjusted very well. Life's moved on and passed him by. Now he spends most of his time just hanging in the garden out back. I go there sometimes to see him, and there we tarry, walking and talking softly and tenderly among the roses. Anyway, a lot of people still like him, it seems, or at least he manages to keep his poll members pretty high. And you'd be surprised how many people even drop by to visit and ask for things every once in a while. But of course, that's alright with him. He's here to help. Thank goodness all this crankiness you read about sometimes in his old books, having the earth swallow people up, raining fire down on cities, that sort of thing. All that seems to have faded in his old age. Now he's just a good-natured, low-maintenance friend who rarely is easy to talk to, especially since he almost never talks back. And when he does, it's usually to tell me through some slightly weird sign that what I want to do regardless is alright by him. That really is the best kind of friend, isn't it? You know the best thing about him, though? He doesn't judge me, ever, for anything. Oh, sure, I know that deep down he wishes I'd be better, more loving, less selfish, and all that. But he's realistic. He knows I'm human, and nobody's perfect. And I'm totally sure he's fine with that. Besides, forgiving people is his job. It's what he does. After all, he's love, right? And I like to think of love as never judging, only forgiving. That's the God I know, lowercase g. And I wouldn't have him any other way. Alright, hold on a second. Okay, we can go in now. And don't worry, we don't have to stay long. Really, he's grateful for any time he can get in. Assumptions about God. Okay, that little riff is a bit on the ridiculous side, but I wonder if it's really so far from what many people, even those who call themselves Christians, think about God. For the most part, he's kind, affable, slightly dazed and needy, but very loving grandfather who has wishes but no demands. Can be safely ignored, and if you don't have time for him, and is very understanding of the fact that human beings make mistakes, much more understanding in fact than the rest of us are. It used to be that even if people didn't call themselves Christians, they had a basic understanding of the Bible's teachings about God and his character. It was just part of the atmosphere people breathed, and much like the apostles did with their fellow Jews, you could make some assumptions about what people knew when you presented the gospel to them. That's not true anymore, at least in most of the world. I grew up in a small town in East Texas, not me, but the person in the book, and most of the time telling someone the gospel amounted to rehearsing a message they already heard 1,000 times. It was a different world altogether, though. When I started college in New Haven, Connecticut, all of a sudden I was surrounded by people who hadn't grown up hearing about God, and who in fact would challenge me on the idea right from the start. I remember the first time I met someone who greeted my mention of God with, "You gotta be kidding me. You believe that?" And then he laughed. That episode played itself out a dozen times over the next few years, and eventually learned to just say, yep, I do. But I also learned pretty quickly that I couldn't make assumptions about what people know about God. If I'm going to proclaim the gospel of Jesus Christ today, I'm going to have to start at the very beginning, at God himself. Of course, you could and really should spend a lifetime studying what God has revealed to us about himself. And you don't have to say everything you know about God in order to present the gospel faithfully. But there are a few basic truths about God that a person has to understand in order to grasp what is going on in the good news of Christianity. Think of it as the good news behind the bad news, behind the good news. There are two main points that we must make clear right from the outset: that God is creator, and that he is holy and righteous. God the creator. That's the next section. The beginning of the Christian message, instead of the beginning of the Christian Bible, is that God created the heavens and the earth. Everything starts from that point, and like an arrow fired from a badly aimed bow, if you get that point wrong, then everything else that follows will be wrong too. The book of Genesis opens with the story of God creating the world, its mountains and valleys, animals and fish, birds and reptiles and everything. God created the rest of the universe too. Stars and moon, planets and galaxies. All of it came about through his spoken word. And all of it came from nothing. It's not as if God took some pre-existing material and molded it into, like clay, into all different things we see in the world. No, Genesis tells us that he spoke and it was. Let there be light, he said, and there was light. God went boom, and there it was. Or bang, and there it was. Many biblical passages tell us how creation testifies to God's glory and power. The heavens declare the glory of God. Psalms 19, verse 1 says, the sky above proclaims his handiwork. Paul says in Romans chapter 1, verse 20, that God's invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world. In the things that have been made, if you ever stood at the edge of a canyon and seen the birds swooping below you and the clouds stretch out over your head, or if you ever stood in a field and felt a tiny rush of fear as you watched a thunderstorm rolling over the horizon, then you know what this means. There is something about the grandeur of creation that calls out to the human heart, saying, you are not all there is. The creation story in Genesis expands in both scope and importance with each new day. First is the creation of light, then the sea, then land, then moon and sun, then birds and fishes and animals, and then at the very pinnacle of God's creating work, man and woman. Then God said, let us make man in our image after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. Genesis chapter 1, verse 26 to 27. Whatever else you think about the story of creation, the implications of this claim that God created the world, and especially that God created you, are enormous. That the world itself is not ultimate, but that it sprang from the mind, word, and hand of someone else, is a revolutionary idea, especially in our day. Contrary to the nihilism that dominates so much human thinking, it means that everything in the universe has a purpose, including human beings. We are not the result of a random chance and genetic mutations, gene reassortments, and this is a very difficult word, chromosomal accidents. We are created. Every one of us is the result of an idea, a plan, and an action of God himself. And that brings both meaning and responsibility to human life. Genesis chapter 1, 26 and 28. None of us is autonomous, and understanding that fact is the key to understanding the gospel. Despite our constant talk of rights and liberty, we are not really as free as we would like to think. We are created, we are made, and therefore we are owned. Because he created us, God has the right to tell us how to live. So in the Garden of Eden, he told Adam and Eve which trees where there's to eat from, and which they could not eat. Genesis chapter 2.